All right. So we've got a whole bunch of articles and notes about Kate Crawford.
Oh, wow.
And clearly you guys want to go deep on this whole like AI and how it's impacting the actual world, not just the tech itself.
Yeah.
So buckle up, because this is going to be a little bit more than just, your typical AI hype.
It's interesting that you're not just interested in like the algorithms themselves.
Right.
You actually want to like understand the person behind them.
Yeah.
Like someone who is challenging the status quo when it comes to AI.
Exactly. Like Kate Crawford isn't your like typical Silicon Valley AI guru.
Right.
She's known for looking at the bigger picture. Like, how does AI affect people? How does it affect power?
Yeah.
How does it affect the planet?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that she didn't even start in computer science.
Right.
Her background's in media studies and sociology.
Oh, wow.
So that gives her a very, very unique perspective.
It's like she's coming at it from a completely different angle.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, oh, this is what AI can do.
You're right.
She's like, okay, but should we? And at what cost?
Exactly. She brings like this critical lens to the field of AI. You know, she's not afraid to question assumptions.
Right.
And she's really good at highlighting the potential downsides.
Yeah. Okay. So for those who don't know who is Kate Crawford, like what makes her such a big deal in the AI ethics world?
Well, she is a leading researcher.
Okay.
And really a powerhouse in the field.
Wow.
So she's a senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research.
Oh, wow.
And she also co-founded the AI Now Institute at NYU.
So she's not just an academic,
Right.
She's working right in like the heart of the tech world.
Exactly.
That gives her a lot of influence.
It does. And, her work at the AI Now Institute has been incredibly influential.
Oh, yeah.
They actually publish a report every year.
Okay.
That's really become essential reading for anyone who's serious about ethical AI.
Wow, so it's a big deal.
Yeah, a really big deal.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. What are some of Kate Crawford's big arguments? Like, what's the core message that she's trying to get across?
I would say one of her central arguments, which she really lays out in her book, Atlas of AI, is that AI is not this neutral tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually built on existing power structures.
Okay.
It often reflects political agendas.
Oh, wow.
And it has a huge environmental cost.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
It really challenges that whole AI is going to save the world narrative that we hear all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's also very critical of what she calls dataism.
Dataism.
Yeah, this idea that data is objective and neutral.
Okay.
And she argues that that's a very dangerous oversimplification.
So, like, what's the takeaway here for our listener out there? It's like, don't just blindly trust any AI system.
Yeah, I mean, always ask yourself, like, what data was this AI trained on?
Right.
And who benefits from its use?
Yeah, it's almost like assuming a recipe will always turn out perfectly.
Yeah.
Even if you're using, like, bad ingredients.
Exactly. The output of an AI is only as good as the data it's fed.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Let's talk about another big issue that she raises, which is the environmental cost of AI.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something we always think about when we're, using our smartphones or just browsing the internet.
Yeah. And this is another area where I think Crawford really shines a light.
Okay.
She argues that AI is not as clean and green as we might think.
Mm-hmm.
Think about all those rare earth minerals that are needed for our devices.
Right.
That are often extracted under really questionable conditions.
Yeah.
And then you have the massive amounts of energy that are used to power these data centers.
So she's drawing a direct line from the digital world back to the physical world and its resources.
Exactly.
It's not all just ones and zeros floating out there in the cloud somewhere.
Right. It's not magic.
Yeah.
She emphasizes what she calls the materiality of AI.
Okay, I have to admit the term's a little bit abstract for me.
Yeah.
How would you explain that?
Yeah.
In a way that makes sense?
So think of it like this. That smartphone that you're using.
Yeah.
It required rare earth minerals that were mined from the earth factories to assemble it.
Oh.
A whole lot of energy to power it.
Yeah.
That's AI's materiality. It has a real world impact, both socially and environmentally.
Wow. You're right.
Yeah.
It really makes you think twice about all the gadgets that we just sort of take for granted.
Yeah. And it's not just the environment, it's people too.
You're talking about how AI can worsen existing social inequalities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Crawford points out that because AI learns from data, it can also learn and perpetuate existing biases.
It's like what we were talking about before with the data issue.
Exactly.
Like with that hiring algorithm example.
Right.
Where else do we see this happening?
Well, one major area of concern is facial recognition technology.
Okay.
Studies have shown that these systems often have racial and gender biases,
Wow.
which can lead to misidentification and discrimination.
That's a really scary thought.
Right.
Especially if AI is being used in things like law enforcement or healthcare or loan applications.
Absolutely.
Like, these biases could have serious real-world consequences for people.
Right. And this is why Crawford's work is so important.
Yeah.
Because it highlights the need for careful scrutiny and regulation of AI, especially in these really high-stakes areas.
This is not something we can just blindly trust.
Exactly. We need to be asking tough questions.
So with all these concerns, what is she actually doing about it?
Well, besides her research and writing, she's a co-founder of the AI Now Institute,
Right.
which is actively working to bring fairness and transparency to AI.
Okay.
So they're not just pointing out the problems, they're actually proposing solutions and pushing for policy changes.
And they've got a pretty big platform, right?
Yeah.
Like, with her position at Microsoft and the Institute's reputation, they're a force to be reckoned with.
They are, and I think they've really helped to shift the conversation around AI from purely technical considerations to one that includes ethical and social impact.
So let's dig a little deeper into her book, Atlas of AI.
Okay.
What are some of the key things that you took away from it?
I think one of the most powerful aspects of the book is how she exposes the hidden costs of AI.
Mm-hmm.
She traces the entire AI supply chain.
Oh, wow.
From, the often exploitative labor conditions in mineral extraction to the sometimes problematic practices of data labeling.
That's something that most people don't even consider.
Right.
We just see the shiny new gadgets.
Exactly.
Not the human toll behind them.
Yeah, and she doesn't let us forget that the digital world is deeply intertwined with the physical world.
Right.
She meticulously details how AI's resource demands and carbon footprint contribute to environmental damage.
It's a powerful reminder that our digital lives have real-world consequences.
Yeah. And then there's the issue of surveillance.
Yep.
Crawford examines how AI is being used to expand surveillance and erode our privacy. And facial recognition is a prime example of this.
So she's basically painting a pretty stark picture of AI's potential downsides.
Yeah.
But she's not just, throwing up her hands and saying, give up.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of solutions does she propose?
Well, Crawford's work is very much a call to action.
Okay.
She argues that we need robust regulations to govern the use of AI, especially in sensitive areas like healthcare and the justice system.
So not banning AI outright, but making sure it's used responsibly.
Exactly. We need to have clear guidelines and safeguards in place to prevent AI from being used in ways that are harmful or discriminatory.
And what about the tech companies themselves?
Yeah.
I mean, they're the ones who are building these systems after all.
Well, Crawford is very clear that tech companies have a responsibility to ensure that their AI systems are developed and deployed ethically.
Okay.
She's not letting them off the hook.
But can we really trust them to do that?
That's a good question.
I mean, their track record isn't exactly perfect.
Right, and that's why she stresses the importance of transparency.
Yeah.
Companies should be open about how their AI systems work, what data they use, and what potential biases might exist.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say.
Exactly. And she's also a big advocate for more diversity in the field of AI development, because right now it's dominated by a pretty small and homogenous group.
Right.
Which likely contributes to the biases that we see in these systems.
Yeah. We need more perspectives, more voices in the room, challenging assumptions, and making sure that AI is truly serving everyone.
Absolutely, and bringing in a wider range of people into the conversation will lead to more robust and ethical AI systems.
So it sounds like her vision for ethical AI is about much more than just tweaking algorithms.
Yes, it is.
It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about and approach AI development.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that AI is not neutral, that it's deeply embedded in social and political systems.
Yeah.
And that we need to be mindful of the power dynamics at play.
It's a lot to think about, and it's certainly a different perspective from the typical AI will solve everything hype that we hear so often.
It is, but it's a vital conversation to have if we want to ensure that AI is used for good, not for harm.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about her concerns and her calls for ethical AI development. But what I'm curious about is, okay, so we've covered a lot about her concerns and her calls for, ethical AI development. But what I'm curious about is, where does her work go from here?
Okay.
Like, what are some of the future directions she's exploring?
Well, one area that she's focusing on is this idea of data sovereignty.
Data sovereignty.
Yeah.
It's this concept that individuals and communities should have more control over their own data.
That's a really interesting idea, especially now when it feels like, our data is constantly being collected and used by these tech companies, sometimes without our knowledge or consent.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it. Like right now, a lot of our data is in the hands of these big tech companies.
And they use it for targeted advertising algorithms, all sorts of things.
Right.
Crawford's arguing that we need to shift that power dynamic and give people more control over how their data is used.
So instead of just our data being out there, for anyone to grab, we would have more say in like who gets to use it and for what purpose.
Precisely. It's about giving individuals and communities more agency in the digital world.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like, in the real world, we have laws about property ownership.
Right.
Data sovereignty is kind of like applying that concept to the digital realm.
That's a great analogy, and I think it gets to the heart of what Crawford is trying to achieve, which is, a more just and equitable digital landscape.
Data sovereignty sounds like a pretty radical idea, though.
It is.
Is it even possible to implement something like that on a large scale?
It's definitely a challenge. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But, Crawford believes that it's essential if we want to prevent the further concentration of power in the hands of just a few tech giants.
Mm-hmm. So it's about democratizing data in a way.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that the benefits of AI and data-driven technologies are shared more broadly and that they don't just serve the interests of the most powerful.
Now, while we're on the topic of, challenging the status quo, I'm curious, has her work faced any pushback?
Yeah.
From people who maybe aren't so keen on these ideas?
Of course she has received some criticism.
Okay.
Yes, some people argue that her focus on the potential downsides of AI is overly negative.
Okay.
And that it might actually stifle innovation.
So they're basically saying she's being a bit of a killjoy.
Yeah, you could say that.
Holding back technological progress.
But Crawford's response is pretty clear. She's not anti-AI.
Okay.
She's against the irresponsible development and deployment of AI.
So she's not trying to stop progress. She's just trying to make sure the progress is done thoughtfully and ethically.
Exactly. She's pushing for a more nuanced and critical conversation about AI.
Okay.
One that goes beyond just the hype and the promises to really consider the potential consequences.
It seems like her work is really striking a chord with a lot of people.
It is.
Like her research and writing have been incredibly influential, both in academia and the tech world.
Yeah. I mean, she's really helped to raise awareness about these ethical and societal implications of AI.
Yeah.
And I think she's inspired, a whole new generation of researchers and developers to approach their work with a greater sense of responsibility.
It's interesting how, her background outside of computer science gives her this really unique perspective.
It does. It allows her to connect the dots between technology, society, and power.
Yeah.
In a way that a lot of people just don't. She's not just looking at the code, she's looking at the bigger picture.
Right, the human impact. She's asking the questions that a lot of people in the tech world might not even be thinking about.
Right, she's challenging us to think differently about AI.
Yeah.
To move beyond these sort of utopian visions and really grapple with the complex realities of this technology.
Well, I think we can all agree that AI is changing the world whether we like it or not.
Absolutely, and the key question, as Crawford points out, is how AI will change the world.
Yeah.
Will it be for the better or for the worse?
Right.
And that's a question we all need to be engaged with.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Kate Crawford's work, what is some of the key takeaways you want our listener to walk away with?
Well, I think first and foremost, remember that AI is not neutral.
Great.
It's shaped by human biases, power structures, and the data it's trained on.
We can't just assume it's going to magically solve all our problems without, potentially creating new ones.
Right. And second, AI has very real consequences, both social and environmental.
Yeah.
It's not just some abstract thing happening in the digital world. It actually has a real impact on people and the planet.
Like we were talking about before with data sovereignty and the materiality of AI.
Exactly.
The choices we make about technology have real world implications.
Exactly. And I think the most important takeaway is that we all have agency in shaping the future of AI.
Okay.
It's not some inevitable force that we're powerless against. Right.
We can choose to develop and deploy AI in ways that are ethical, just, and sustainable.
So it's not just about, being afraid of AI or rejecting it outright. It's about being thoughtful and intentional about how we use it.
Exactly. Crawford's work is both a warning and a call to action.
Okay.
It's a warning about the potential dangers of unchecked AI, but it's also a call to harness this incredibly powerful technology for good.
She's urging us to be thoughtful, to be critical, and to demand better from the people and institutions that are shaping the future of AI.
Yeah, and remember, this conversation about AI is far from over.
It's not.
It's an ongoing process, and we all need to stay engaged and informed.
We only scratched the surface here. We've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation about the role of AI in our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, we're at this pivotal moment, right? The technology is advancing so rapidly.
Right.
And it's really crucial that we don't just let it shape our future by default, you know?
Mm-hmm. We need to be active participants in shaping how it develops and how it's used.
And that's what I think is so powerful about Kate Crawford's work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about, technical issues. She's raising these fundamental questions about power control and, who gets to benefit from these technologies.
Exactly. She's pushing for a more democratic and inclusive approach to AI development.
Right.
One that really takes into account the needs and perspectives of everyone, not just a select few.
And one of the things that really struck me was her emphasis on public engagement.
Yes.
It's not enough for just a handful of experts to be thinking about these issues.
Right.
We all need to be involved in the conversation.
I completely agree. She argues that we need to move beyond this idea that AI is something that's just happening to us.
Right.
We have choices to make. We have decisions to influence.
So it's not a question of if AI will change the world,
all right,
but how.
Exactly.
And we have a say in that how.
We do. We can choose to develop and deploy it in a way that benefits humanity and the planet.
Right.
Or we can allow it to exacerbate existing inequalities and harm the environment.
It really is up to us.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Kate Crawford's work to wrap things up. What are some of the absolute key takeaways you want our listener to remember?
Okay, well, I think 3 things come to mind.
Okay.
First, always remember that AI is not neutral.
Mm-hmm.
It's shaped by human decisions and biases and the data that it's trained on.
Right.
So be wary of anyone who's claiming that an AI system is perfectly objective.
It's like that saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. Wow. Second, AI has real-world consequences.
Yeah.
Both social and environmental.
Right.
It's not just some abstract digital phenomenon. It affects people's lives, their opportunities, and even the planet itself.
Don't forget about AI's materiality.
Yes.
All those resources and labor that go into making our devices and powering the systems behind them.
Right. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, you have agency in shaping the future of AI.
Okay.
It's not some unstoppable force that we're powerless against. We all have a role to play in demanding that it be developed and used ethically, responsibly, and for the benefit of everyone.
Crawford's work is both a wake-up call and a source of hope.
It is.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant and critical, but it also shows us that there's a path forward.
Yeah.
A way to harness this powerful technology for good.
Absolutely.
She's urging us to be informed, to ask tough questions.
Yes.
And to demand better from the people and institutions shaping the future of AI.
That's right.
So, to our listener out there, if you want to dive deeper into these ideas, definitely check out Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. It's a really eye-opening read. It'll challenge your assumptions and make you think differently about the world around you. And keep those questions coming, because this AI conversation is just getting started. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive every